Hey there, it's Clay with modernlove.life, and this is the Relationship Inner Game Experience. Welcome back. This is our third episode, and today I want to talk to you about something that we actually talked about on our previous Love Talk FM podcast. But this is an important topic and something that I definitely want to make sure that everybody who is a part of the Relationship Inner Game Experience is aware of and is knowledgeable of. And that is the difference between vulnerability that actually creates a positive connection and vulnerability that actually destroys a positive connection. And this is important because vulnerability in relationships can actually be a very good thing. It can actually bring people close together. In fact, I think that most of us can agree that vulnerability is something that should be expressed in relationships. We all, I think, intrinsically believe that we deserve to be loved for who we are. And anytime that we feel the need to be someone other than who we really are, or to put on some sort of act, or to play mind games or something along those lines, it is essentially an act of not being vulnerable, an act of trying to hide who we are. And that is not something that's going to get you a positive emotional connection with somebody else, and that's not something that's going to give you a great long-term relationship with someone else. I think that when it comes to marriage and relationships and things of that nature, people pretty readily take on this concept, and you don't have to do too much convincing. But the issue comes up when we talk a lot about dating, or in these kind of high stakes or make or break moments that we often have in dating or relationship moments, such as, going to meet somebody, going out on the first couple of dates, or maybe trying to save a relationship that's, on the rocks or something like that. People often have a different sort of relationship with vulnerability in relationships, let's just put it that way. And first of all, I want to make it extremely clear that my position is that you absolutely want to be vulnerable with the people that you want to be in a relationship with. That vulnerability absolutely will bring you closer together if it is expressed in the correct way, in an appropriate way, okay? If you have to be someone else in order to go out on that date, or to, save that relationship, or to have the relationship work in the long run, it's going to create a whole lot of frustration and difficulty in that relationship, because it's going to require you to constantly put on an act, to constantly be someone that you're not, to constantly wear a mask in order to keep up the status quo. And although that might work short term in order to maybe, get you that first date, or to, give somebody the impression that maybe you've turned a new leaf or something like that, it's not going to be very effective in the long run, because you will have to eventually drop your guard and really just show your true colors. You can't put on an act forever. And even if you did, it would just cause resentment to build up within inside of you, as you would sort of build up this level of contempt for the other person for not accepting you the way that you are, or for making you put on this act or pretend to be someone that you're not, or suppress a certain part of you or something like that. And so if this is not something that we want in a successful long-term relationship or marriage, then why is it something that we often tell ourselves to do, or tell our friends to do, when it comes to dating? Why is it that we tell people to, just act confident? Why is it we tell people to play hard to get? Why is it we tell people to pretend to be an alpha male? Why is it we tell people to not seem needy or desperate? And that's because there's this great disconnect between successful relationships and the world of dating. And maybe this is something that we can talk about more in another podcast or another Relationship Inner Game Experience episode, but there is this sharp divide between these two worlds. And it is my belief that this divide does not need to exist. And that if, in order to get that first date, or if in order to save that relationship, you need to be someone other than who you are, it is my belief that that is not going to result in a great relationship in the long run. If you cannot be yourself and date somebody, then that person probably isn't going to accept you. And if that person isn't going to accept you, then you really don't want to be in that relationship with that person anyway to begin with, right? I hope that makes sense. And anyway, if you do try to be someone other than who you are, if you do try to hide your most genuine expression of yourself, that is going to really manifest itself in a lot of difficulties and problems later on down the road. As you sort of settle into a relationship, there eventually comes a point where you start to feel a little bit more comfortable sharing yourself with the other person. That's not to say that you shouldn't be vulnerable in the beginning, but vulnerability just becomes a little bit more easier the more committed that the two of you get, the more of that relationship foundation you build up. And as you start to get more and more comfortable, there will eventually come a point in time where you think that, okay, well now I can just let myself go a little bit. Now I can just really be who I am. Now I don't have to put on this act any longer. And that is when things start to crumble. That's when the other person feels a little bit cheated. They thought that they were getting together with somebody who is an alpha male, as an example, but they actually found out that you're, anxious and afraid. Or they thought that they were getting together with somebody who was hard to get, but actually they found out it was just a ruse and all you do is just sit around in your sweatpants all day on the weekend or whatever it is. And so that's why it's really important to be forthright and honest and vulnerable with who you are and what your experience is in relationships. Now, with that being said, there is a way that you can be vulnerable that will promote connection and a way that you can be vulnerable that will actually destroy connection. And this is where a lot of confusion comes into play. We all fundamentally, I think, believe that successful relationships thrive on vulnerability, on honesty. And I think in the dating world, there's this saying that, just be yourself. And it's true, you really should be yourself, but oftentimes a lot of people don't know how to be themselves. They think that they're just naturally shy. They think that they're just naturally quiet. They think that they're just naturally anxious. And this isn't necessarily so, in my belief. I believe that these sorts of behaviors are actually the result of a thought pattern that we often have that causes us to develop these anxious thoughts and beliefs. Limiting beliefs that tell us that we're not enough, limiting beliefs that tell us that, nobody will ever love us and things like that. When you have these sorts of thoughts, it's no jump to really imagine that you might be a little bit more anxious, you might be a little bit more skittish, you might be more prone to try to grasp at tips and tricks and tactics and mind games and other ways of being inauthentic to try to, trick somebody into liking you, for lack of a better term. And when we hear things like just be yourself, we think that means that we should just, regurgitate everything that we're feeling onto the table and just tell that to somebody else. But it doesn't really work that way, because I think in an instinctive level, we know that when we go on a first date with somebody, we know that we don't say, hey, let's get married. I want to marry you. What should the name of our, 2 kids be? We don't do that because we know that is too much, too fast for the other person. That is the kind of vulnerability that actually destroys connection. And the truth is that this kind of vulnerability destroys connection, not necessarily because of what you said, but because you weren't matching the other person's emotional state. You were not meeting them where they're at emotionally. And the other person is probably going to get the sense that you are using them as a means to an end. So, for example, if on a first date I was to, meet up with some nice woman, and I were to say, hey, what do you think? Let's get married. I was thinking our first 2 kids could be named Danny and Sarah, right? That's going to probably weird her out, and I'm probably not going to get to date number 2. And the reason why is because I haven't actually gotten the chance to know her yet. We don't actually have a good rapport with one another. We don't actually have a good connection with one another. So when I say things like this, she is inherently aware that we don't have this strong emotional connection. And so when I say things like, hey, let's get married, hey, these are going to be the names of our kids, or something like that, she knows that I actually don't care about her. I actually am not interested in having a connection with her. I'm more interested in the idea of being married. I'm more interested in the idea of having kids or being a parent or, whatever it might be. And so if she gets this sense that she is a means to an end, I'm using her as a means to an end for me getting marriage or me getting a girlfriend or me getting kids or something like that, she is going to feel bad about that. That is going to destroy the connection because I am broadcasting to her that she is not important and that my own agenda of being married, of having kids, of having a girlfriend, of whatever is more important to me than her experience, than her connection with me, than our dynamic together. So I hope you see how that works. And this often comes through in a lot of the people that we work with who are going through breakups, who want to work things out with their ex, who want to work things out with their partner. They think, oh, I need to be vulnerable. I need to just tell my ex how I feel. And so they say, yeah, I want to get back together with you. I want us to be in a relationship again. But if their ex isn't in a place where they feel connected to them emotionally, then their ex is going to get that same feeling, that same sense that they're just using them as a means to an end to get into a relationship. And your ex doesn't just want to be the warm body that happens to be there in order to help you meet your agenda of being in a relationship so that you can feel better. Your ex wants to be in a relationship with somebody who actually is going to care about them, who's going to think about their needs and their opinions, and actually have an emotional connection with them. And so when it comes to situations like this, I often tell people that you probably don't really want the relationship. You probably don't really want marriage. You probably don't really want to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, right? You probably actually want what you think those sorts of things are going to bring you, right? And you probably think that being in a relationship is going to give you all kinds of connection and bonding and closeness. You probably think that having a marriage is going to get you probably those similar things as well too. And so instead of going for the thing that you think is going to give you that, why not just go for the thing that you actually want, which is the closeness, the connection, the bonding, and all of that. And so when it comes to being vulnerable, instead of saying on your first date, hey, why don't we get married? Why don't you say something along the lines of, hey, it's been really nice getting to know you. I really enjoy how we're connecting like this. I'd love to connect with you more. Something along those lines, right? That kind of meets the other person where they're at, and it shows them that you're not using them as a means to an end to get to something else. And that is actually the good kind of vulnerability, the kind of vulnerability that promotes and creates and strengthens emotional connection. It's the kind of vulnerability that is not focused on the ends that we're trying to get, like getting married, getting into a relationship, having a boyfriend, having a girlfriend, getting back together, saving the relationship, all of that stuff. It's vulnerability that is connected and focused on the means, such as being connected, having a great conversation, spending time together, things like that. That is the kind of vulnerability that absolutely will bring you close together and absolutely will help you, advance things towards maybe what you want, which is probably that connection, probably that closeness, right? And that's something that you can absolutely openly share with somebody else that will most likely bring connection and harmonious relationships together with the two of you. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into our questions for this week. I've got my cup of coffee, I've got my computer here. Let's see what questions we have this time. Okay, our first question is from M on the BS machine thoughts versus trusting your gut feeling. M writes in and says, Dear Clay, this is a question about the concept of our brain being a BS machine that strung me along for quite a while. As far as I understand the concept, it is a way of managing your thoughts and staying positive even in difficult times. I have worked hard to avoid filling in the blanks with negative thoughts when trying to get my ex back, which is what led us to the new beginning stage eventually. However, sometimes I found it hard to not fill in the blanks because I had a gut feeling that something is wrong when he started to pull away again after great interactions. But I tried to stay positive nonetheless because we had this amazing connection. As it turns out, though, he had an affair while we were basically acting like a couple again. So my gut feeling was correct. I experienced many times already that I can trust my gut feeling very well, and that it turned out to be true in the end. probably due to high present moment awareness. So my question is, how can you avoid to not fool yourself and to keep up false hope by ignoring your BS machine thoughts? Or to put it a different way, when is a BS machine thought actually not a real BS machine thought, but a sign that might protect us from pain? And how do I know when it's time to listen to them and potentially sharing them with another person? I find this really hard to disentangle because I don't want to share all of my BS thoughts with the other person. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you. Okay, so when it comes to the BS machine, when it comes to this force in the back of your mind that notices blanks in behavior, it says, oh, hey, look, this person just texted somebody. I wonder who that was, and your mind just rushes in to fill in the gaps with, oh, I bet he's cheating on me, or I bet she's having an affair, or something like that. That is the BS machine. And again, the point isn't to completely fill your mind with optimistic thoughts like, oh, well, obviously he would never cheat on me, or obviously he's not texting somebody else. But it's just to fill your mind with thoughts that are not worst case scenario or catastrophe predictions or anything like that. Because oftentimes in the world, we have this inclination to think that we're being realistic when it comes to our thoughts and when it comes to filling in these blanks with the people that we might be involved in romantically. If somebody doesn't call you back, it's because you did something silly on the first date. Or if somebody isn't, responding to your text in a timely manner, it's because they don't love you, or things along these lines. That is what the vast majority of people naturally incline themselves towards when it comes to their thought processes. They naturally incline themselves towards filling in the blanks with the worst possible outcome, all while believing that they are being realistic. When in actuality, they aren't being realistic, they're being pessimistic, right? And as long as you are erring on the hard extreme of worst case scenario, you're not being realistic in any way whatsoever. In fact, you're often setting yourself up to fail. Because when we assume the worst, when we assume that somebody is cheating on us, when we assume that somebody is lying to us, when we assume that somebody is dating someone else, when we assume that somebody didn't like something that we did, what we're essentially doing is we're filling our mind with these thoughts that really we don't have any basis in reality to believe, and we're choosing to believe them and we're searching for evidence to prove them true, all at the same time while we are increasing our amount of fear, increasing our amount of anxiety, increasing our amount of insecurity. And the more that these negative emotions grow within us, the more they motivate us to act from a place of fear, to act from a place of anxiety, to act from a place of insecurity. And this can cause us to do things that are not very resourceful, such as accost somebody about the text that they sent, or to, assume that somebody is doing something, or to, preemptively break up with somebody because you have a suspicion that they're, dating other people behind your back. And the intention behind turning off the BS machine isn't to, shield you from the very real possibility that people might be being disingenuous with you, lying to you, cheating on you, or anything like that. The purpose is to balance out your thinking so that you are not creating these irrationally fearful thoughts, irrationally anxious thoughts, irrationally insecure thoughts, and instead you're having more reasonable, actually realistic thoughts, not thoughts that are unreasonably optimistic, like everybody loves me, nobody would ever cheat on me, nobody would ever possibly lie to me, or anything like that, because that's equally not true, right? And so what the goal of all of this is to realize when you are having these catastrophe predictions, when you're having these worst case scenario thoughts, and to balance them out with not the extreme polar opposite, but with something that's more reasonable, right? One of the reasons that affirmations often don't work for a lot of people is because they are in complete polar contrast to what the person might actually believe. So if somebody believes, nobody loves me, nobody loves me, nobody loves me, just repeating everybody loves me, everybody loves me, everybody loves me isn't going to undo that. In fact, your mind is most likely going to reject that thought or reject that affirmation because it is the exact polar opposite of what your experience has been up until this point. But if you were to, for example, take on a mindset of some people might not like me, but other people probably would like me, that is a much more balanced out, much more realistic thought, an actually realistic thought. And so when it comes to situations like this, we want to have these sorts of thoughts because, number one, they are going to break us from the habit of just filling in the blanks with the worst case scenario possible thinking out there, and they're going to expand our thoughts to be actually more normal, more realistic. It is much more reasonable to assume that some people might not like you, no matter how much you work on your physical appearance or your personality or whatever. There are going to be people out there that don't like you. And no matter what you do to your physical appearance or your personality or whatever, there are going to be people out there that still like you no matter what. And so it's much more realistic to say, yeah, some people won't like me, but yeah, some people will like me. That's absolutely a realistic thing. Whereas something that's nobody likes me, nobody likes me, nobody likes me, that's unrealistic. And equally, everybody likes me, everybody likes me, everybody likes me, that's unrealistic as well too. And so because this is a more realistic belief, and because it is inclusive of your, in this example, core limiting belief that nobody likes you, it's much more easy for your mind to accept it and to take it in. And so that's the first thing that's happening here. And second of all, because you're able to quiet these feelings of anxiety, quiet these feelings of panic, quiet these feelings of insecurity that, nobody likes you, or oh my God, look, he's on his phone again. He's probably texting with her. He liked that photo of somebody on Facebook. What does that mean? He's probably cheating on me with her. Instead of jumping to those conclusions, we're actually turning down the volume on those emotions of fear, on those emotions of anxiety, on those emotions of insecurity, on those emotions of anger, or whatever it might be. And we are allowing us to actually bring ourselves to the conversation, to the interaction in a much more realistic frame of mind. So instead of just accosting him and accusing him of cheating just because he liked a photo on Facebook of some other woman, instead you can just actually have a real conversation like, hey, I noticed that you liked this photo on Facebook. I was just wondering what that's all about, or whatever, right? And so you can actually have a real conversation about it as opposed to jumping to conclusions, as opposed to acting from a point of fear, as opposed to acting from a point of anxiety, as opposed to acting to a point of anger. And, I'm not in any way considering that you should just go out there and say, oh, it's nothing, he's not cheating on me, it's nothing, he's not cheating on me, it's nothing, he's not cheating on me. Because, sure, if somebody does seem to take an active interest in another person on Facebook, it is a possibility that that person could be dating that person. It is a possibility that they might be sleeping with that person. It is a possibility that they could be lying to you. That is absolutely a possibility. But it's not the only possibility. It's not the only possible outcome. And that's often all people can see when they're coming from a place of BS machine thinking, when they're coming from a place of scarcity, when they're coming from a place of fear, when they're coming from a place of anxiety. And I'm not in any way telling you to ignore these possible warning signs or to look the other way or anything like that. I'm just telling you to, hey, before we jump to conclusions, let's actually take a look at what's really happening, right? And sure, maybe he is texting somebody. Maybe he is doing all that stuff. But is it worth, jumping to conclusions that he's cheating? I don't know. I think at first you want to have an encompassing view of, yeah, he might not be cheating. Yeah, he might be cheating. There's a wide variety of what is actually possible just because somebody seems to be liking a lot of photos on Facebook or texting a certain person a lot or whatever, right? There's a wide possibility of what could actually be happening. And rather than jumping to that conclusion, let's take on a more broad view of what's happening, and then we can just simply take in more facts, more information, and start to focus in on what is actually going on. I'm not in any way encouraging people to look the other way, to ignore things that are actually happening, like, somebody cheating on you, somebody lying to you, or something like that, but to simply just not jump to conclusions and to instead take in information, look at it objectively, understand that there is more than one possibility, understand that you don't have to have these catastrophe predictions and just jump to conclusions. And then as you take in more information, you can actually start to narrow in on what the truth really is. Or, you can always go up and talk to somebody directly and say, hey, I saw this thing and it made me think that you might be cheating on me. Like, what's going on? Or, just things like that. So I hope this has helped you out, Em. And again, if this is something that anyone else needs help with in regards to relationships or dating, I would strongly recommend you check out one of our courses called the Compatibility Code. It's kind of like upgrading your relationship operating system to the next level so that you can have better quality relationships through really balancing out your thought process and really essentially switching off what we call this BS machine, this part of your mind that rushes in to fill in the blanks with worst case scenario thinking that often ends up sabotaging our dating or relationship outcomes. So again, I'll link to that in the notes for this webcast, this podcast, this video cast, this whatever you want to call it. Anyway, so Em, I hope this helped you out, and please keep us updated on how things go moving forward. Okay, our next question is from Clyde. Clyde writes in and says, I would like to ask you about rebound relationships. It's said that they happen between two emotionally unavailable people who are focused on getting to the finish line, and so they rush things. When one of the partners becomes emotionally available, what usually happens in my experience? What are the main things that put their relationship in trouble? I'm asking because it's hard for me to imagine how a couple can transition from rushing things into a breakup. I suppose it can't happen overnight. Okay, so to answer this question, let's just take a little bit of a rewind here so that people can catch up. But basically, when somebody is in a rebound relationship, it really takes... that person is typically emotionally unavailable, okay? That person is going through a breakup and they are, instead of confronting the emotions from that breakup, they're choosing to look the other way and jump into a new relationship with someone else. And in order for that someone else to be open to the idea of being in a relationship with an emotionally unavailable person, that person also has a predisposition towards being emotionally unavailable themselves. So in that sense, like attracts like, and two emotionally unavailable people find a way of forming a relationship together, in this case, as a rebound relationship. And what happens is that as long as they're both emotionally unavailable, they can be kind of caught in this dance with one another. And this can take a whole different series of forms and look a whole lot of different ways depending on what flavor of emotional unavailability these people may have. But as is the case with people that go through breakups, many of them often eventually become emotionally available. Okay, so obviously, if somebody is emotionally unavailable and they end up in a relationship with someone else, and then they break up, and they're likely to stay emotionally unavailable. But if people are able to be emotionally available when it comes to being in a relationship with somebody else, and then they go through a breakup and temporarily become emotionally unavailable, it's very likely that person will eventually start to become emotionally available again. And when this happens, if they are caught in a rebound relationship with someone else who is emotionally unavailable, and that other person also doesn't make the transition to become emotionally available as well too, what can happen is these people will start to lose interest in one another. They'll just start to not be interested in the way that things typically play out. So just as like an example, it's very common for as an example, emotionally unavailable men to be a little bit, avoidant. They kind of keep you at arm's length. They might kind of reel you in a little bit by promising, hey, we'll be in a relationship, we'll move real fast, we'll move in together. But then, they might vanish off the face of the earth for a period of time and then, come back and all that stuff. And a sort of classical emotionally unavailable woman would be attracted to this kind of man because in some deep unconscious level she knows that he is unable or unwilling to commit to her, and there's certain things about him that just fire inside of her and says, yes, this is the kind of person that I need to try to be in a relationship with. If I can get this kind of guy to commit to me, then it means that I truly am lovable. But if he pulls away like all the other guys do, then it just validates the fact that I'm not worthy of love or whatever, right? And so in this way, emotionally unavailable people in this example, in this hypothetical example, can remain caught in a dynamic together. He kind of brings her close, and then when she gets too close, he pulls away. She tries to pursue him to bring him close. The closer that she pursues him, the more he pulls away. When she, gets depressed and kind of starts to move on, he swoops back in and starts to pull her back into the dynamic, and the cycle continues. But if one of them starts to become emotionally available, like let's say the guy becomes emotionally available, he might lose interest in trying to get a relationship from an emotionally unavailable woman. And likewise, the woman might suddenly lose interest in being with the emotionally available man because he doesn't trigger that kind of response in her of saying, hey, this is the kind of person who is probably going to validate my fears about not being lovable, who's going to pull away when I want to be close and all of that stuff. He might lose interest in her because on some level, he understands that she is, seeking validation. She is needing approval. She's insecure, and as he becomes more and more available, he knows that he wants to actually have a real relationship. He's not wanting somebody who's going to constantly seek validation, constantly be worried that he's going to pull away or something like that. He wants to be able to have somebody in his life that he can have a comfortable, committed relationship with without that person having to walk on eggshells around him. And so what typically happens is that as one person becomes emotionally available, the kind of dynamic that keeps the two people sort of locked in orbit around each other, so to speak, gets broken up, and they just sort of naturally start to diverge in their own ways. The emotionally unavailable person will probably move on to find another emotionally unavailable person to, be in that familiar dynamic with. The emotionally available person will probably lose interest in the emotionally unavailable person, and they'll probably start to pursue relationships and interactions with emotionally available people. And so it can take a lot of different forms as well. It doesn't necessarily have to look like this, but that's definitely one way that this might look. So, Clyde, I hope this has answered your question. And, if you have any questions about anything else coming up, please feel free to update us on those. All right, so those have been our questions for this week. Now, as we wrap up this episode of the Relationship Inner Game Experience, I just want to thank you again for staying all the way to the end. I hope you've made it all the way to the end. I know these episodes are a lot longer than maybe some of the other videos we put up, so I want to thank you for your very lengthy attention span. But with that being said, please go ahead and check us out over at modernlove.life. And, if you're watching this on YouTube, please go ahead and like and subscribe to this channel. Go ahead and leave a comment down below letting me know what you think of these longer format videos. If you like this whole question and answer style of things, or if you have anything that's on your mind right now too, go ahead and leave those down in the comments as well. And if you're listening to this over on iTunes, please go ahead and subscribe to us on iTunes and leave a nice review. It does help other people find us on iTunes. I'm not exactly sure how the whole technical thing works, but somebody smart told me that, if people leave you reviews and all that stuff on iTunes, it'll help other people to find the podcast as well too. So once again, this has been Clay from modernlove.life. This has been the Relationship Inner Game Experience, and I'll go ahead and talk to you next week. Please take care.